Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. And this is pretty much all the German I know, but it is a pleasure to be here, and I've always been taught that if you are in a foreign country, you should at least say hello in a foreign language. And so this is the best that I could do. Thank you very much, Alex, the ICBC organizers, for having me for this talk. This talk is on the Entourage-Effekt, and if you just read the abstract and thought that this talk is about the interactions of acidic cannabinoids and terpenes, this is a bit of a bait and switch that will probably bend your minds from many different directions. Now, I would like to introduce the company, which is Cantelligence. I'm co-founder of this company. We're excited. We are located at the University of Houston Innovation Center, which is the company for education and innovation in cannabinoid research. We're not talking about all the positive effects because there are some negative effects of cannabis as well, so we present a balanced point of view in that respect. Now, what I'm going to talk about really is the entourage effect, but when we think about the entourage, we always talk about the plant itself. What we have actually is we have an endocannabinoid system and the entourage of the endocannabinoid system. I will discuss that. I will discuss then the exogenous cannabinoids or phytocannabinoids and the entourage that exists in the plant. The plant then gets produced into the products, and what is in the plant doesn't always end up in the product. So it's important to start paying attention to the entourage of the products and what is in the products, as well as your own daily entourage that you experience on an everyday basis, which can then, combining all of these three, can lead to the most effective individualized cannabinoid medications. Now, what we have really experienced in the 20th century and the way the stigmatization of cannabis happened and the way our understanding of cannabis was shaped by the politicians, by the special interest, and by the media. Reefer madness in the 1930s had a very serious effect on the society and the perception of cannabis. It was really diabolical lies that were prophesied by the government and the media in the United States. And it had very far-reaching effects to the United Nations and globally as well, where now many countries are actually surprised about the changes that the United States is undergoing with medical and even recreational cannabis. However, we all know the science, and the science tells us that there is a major body homeostatic regulatory system. This is the endocannabinoid system, where different organs in the system express CB1, cannabinoid receptor 1, and cannabinoid receptor 2. We also express endogenous cannabinoids. We produce our own cannabis. We produce our own pot inside our own bodies that can then stimulate CB1 and CB2 receptors. This is a major homeostatic system that gets activated with birth when CB1 receptors causes you to have munchies and to seek the milk, the suckling behavior from the mother's milk, which then supplies increased amounts of anandamide, one of the endocannabinoids. So this is a system that's involved in many different regulatory aspects. I just want to move this a little forward so I can look at my slides. I apologize for this. So we have pain stress modulation by the endocannabinoid system. We have immune function modulation, appetite, memory, inflammation, thermoregulation, and other effects. It's important because CB1 receptors are mostly expressed in the brain, and they're expressed in the gut and the heart, where CB2 receptors are dominating in the spleen and immune system organs and immune system cells. Activation of these different receptors and control different aspects in the body that included on the right, like appetite, memory, inflammation, thermoregulation, and other effects. And on the bottom left, what you see is you see anandamide structure on the bottom right, and you see the structure of THC, which is resemblant to anandamide. And the way these compounds work that are endogenous is they bind to the CB receptors like a key that goes into a lock. But that's where a lot of our understanding, scientific understanding, stops, because something has to turn the key. And it's thermoregulation potentially, it's potentially other compounds and other neuromodulatory and modulatory chemicals in the body. We also have to realize that many doors have many locks, many keys, many holes and orifices, and so we can regulate how much passes through these doors or how active that door is for the passage, depending on how many keys are inserted in these many different locks. And so different molecules inside the body and outside the body will interact with these doors with multiple locks and regulating the receptor functions in the body. The endocannabinoid system is a system that gets activated during stress, during heightened activity. We get release of, in the excitatory synapses, of the glutamate, and this glutamate is stored in the vesicles. When there is depolarization, glutamate travels postsynaptically and depolarizes the cells. If there is too much of this excitatory glutamate, which is the major excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain, there's a production of endocannabinoids. And endocannabinoids, unlike the vesicle-stored neurotransmitters, freely cross, they're lipid-soluble through the membranes of this cell. So this is neuron 1, presynaptic, and neuron 2. And this is the communication between these cells, neurotransmission. So you regulate neurotransmission, and when you activate CB1 receptors on this side, what these CB1 receptors do is they decrease the influx of calcium. Calcium means life, and calcium also means release of neurotransmitters and communication between the cells. And by shutting down the influx of calcium, we're now regulating the release of this excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate on demand as the heightened activity in the system increased. And so we go through life and balancing excitation and inhibition. It's a system that is pretty robust in our brains. It's controlling the body. The two major neurotransmitters, excitation is glutamate, inhibition is GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid. And so what we are understanding is that endocannabinoid system is regulating the acute excitation and inhibition. This is the acute reactions. These are the receptors that make us move and think fast. The other neurotransmitters in our bodies represent emotions, they represent memory, they represent slower physical and biological activity. So it's very important. This is the survival and the adaptation to the fast situation. When the endocannabinoids are produced on demand, then they are balancing the excitation and inhibition. The CB1 receptor is the most abundant G-protein coupled receptor in the brain. I'll repeat that again. It's the most abundant G-protein coupled receptor in the brain. It just doesn't just exist. It exists in high densities in different brain structures. Different brain structures such as prefrontal cortex, for example, expresses a lot of the CB1 receptors and is responsible for executive function. Cerebral cortex, the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that is responsible for emotions and memory storage, as well as a small part of the brain here that's very important, amygdala, which is involved in emotional and fear response. And the amygdala function is exaggerated in stress and also in the cases of PTSD. So you have increased aggression and you have increased sense of fear. Also important to know that CB1 receptors are expressed in the brainstem, but unlike opioid receptors, they're not expressed in the vital breathing centers of the brainstem. Therefore, there are no deaths from cannabis, natural cannabis. If there are any reported deaths, they are from synthetic cannabinoids that are synthesized in the lab, such as synthetic kush or synthetic spice. They are not the same phytocannabinoids, and they're obviously not endocannabinoids. That's the reason why stimulating high levels of cannabis and affecting brainstem does not lead to death. And the opioid expression is very high in the vital brain centers, leading to death. So when you engage this endocannabinoid system with stress, with trauma, with hyperexcitability, with inflammation, the endocannabinoid system responds by allowing you to eat, by allowing you to rest and sleep, to forget. Forgetting is an important part of our survival. If we always remembered everything, especially bad experiences and emotions, we could get overwhelmed by them. Forget and neuroprotection. So what is emerging now is that endocannabinoid system is regulating excitation and inhibition, and thereby protecting the brain, and protecting the brain from further injuries. Because if you have imbalance and you have rises of excitation to abnormal levels, this will eventually lead to cell death, to programmed cell death in the brains. And so cannabinoids, especially CBD, one of the champions of cannabinoids, is showing strong effects on neuroprotection. Is it one system? Is it one system that's regulating many systems? Or is it different endocannabinoid systems that are now linked to different receptors? These endogenous molecules in your body that activate CB1 and CB2 receptors, They also activate serotonin receptors that are responsible for your appetite and your mood and smile on your face. They activate TRPV vanilloid receptors, which is the pain receptor, PPAR receptor, which is a cancer proliferative cell receptor, ionic channels and plasma membranes. They're expressed in organs that are in distinct body systems, and impairments associated with distinct syndromes, ranging from inflammatory bowel syndrome to epilepsy, that are associated with either deficiencies in the endocannabinoid system or endocannabinoid system excitation can actually balance some of the effects. So now we understand that there is this internal entourage of the endocannabinoids, and these endocannabinoids are interacting with many diverse receptors. And we have the plant. The reason why we're interested in the plant is because phytocannabinoids that are found mostly in the trichomes, in the glandular trichomes of the plants. That's also where most of the terpenes are found. We realize now that there is a whole variety of these molecules. The other important thing to notice is the plant itself does not produce psychoactive ingredients or chemicals. The plant itself synthesizes THCA or CBDA. In fact, it synthesizes only acidic cannabinoids. Over 95% of what the cannabis flower has is non-psychoactive, non-intoxicating, acidic phytocannabinoids, such as THCA, such as CBDA, such as CDCA. They all come from cannabigerolic acid through different synthesases, turning them into THC acid, CBD acid. That acid needs to be heated or decarboxylated otherwise in a neutral environment or basic environment to become a neutral cannabinoid, and that neutral cannabinoid in the form of THC now becomes psychoactive, or intoxicating in the form of CBD. It is non-intoxicating. There are different cannabinoids, over 115 cannabinoids so far reported, and other molecules. There's over 1,000 molecules in that plant. Many different terpenes, esters, flavonoids, omega fatty essential acids that we can find in the entire plant. Cannabinoids such as major cannabinoids as CBD and THC, we all know, but there is a lot of minor cannabinoids, and a lot of current research is ongoing in testing the effects of minor cannabinoids and interactions of these minor cannabinoids such as THCV or CBDV, cannabidiol, with other major phytocannabinoids like THC and CBD. The reason why cannabis smells like lemon, and we call it lemon skunk, is because it contains terpene, limonene, and that limonene is also found in citrus fruit. The reason why we say lavender kush is because there are some resemblances in the cannabis flower to the smells and tastes of lavender, and linalool will be found in lavender. Beta-caryophyllene, it was mentioned earlier, is also a terpene. Beta-caryophyllene is a selective CB2 receptor agonist, and you will find beta-caryophyllene in cannabis, but you'll also find it in cloves, in hops, and it exists in other plants. So these terpenes now, the entourage of terpenes that we have in our daily entourage, we consume fruit, we consume lavender, spices, is now also part of what we understand is the entourage of cannabis plant. If we talk about the champion, so to speak, of the cannabinoids, the therapeutic champion, CBD, CBD blocks enzymatic breakdown of fatty amino acid hydroxylase. This is very important. The reaction itself is not important, but it increases endocannabinoids. So CBD not just acts itself on the body, on the system, and by the way, CBD is very weak bindings to CB1 and CB2 receptor. It's much stronger binding to 5-HT serotonin receptor and other receptors in the body. So it's really only partly CBD is acting through the endocannabinoid system. It's acting through multiple different targets. It crosses blood-brain barrier very rapidly. We have a barrier between the blood and what goes into the brain. Many good pharmaceuticals cross it easily, and a lot of cannabinoids and terpenes are lipophilic. They cross easily. CBD is non-intoxicating. It is psychoactive because it reduces anxiety. Coffee is psychoactive, and so is nicotine. There's nothing wrong with being psychoactive. I think there's a distinction here that it's non-intoxicating. CBD can counteract negative effects of THC, as we all know exists, such as paranoia, anxiety, and panic attacks as some of the most common effects of high THC consumption. There is a lot of evidence, and most of the evidence in human studies come from epilepsy studies that are still ongoing, and there's multiple of different studies that are using combinations of THC or CBD at different ratios that are currently undergoing. Terpenes are outlined here, some of my favorite ones, some of the more common ones that you'll find in cannabis. They're aromatic lipophilic compounds, easily cross membranes and blood-brain barrier. If you look at D-limonene by itself, limonene, it's potent anti-cancer. If you look at beta-myrcene, that you also find in hop and mango, it's a potent anti-inflammatory. Alpha-pinene is acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. You know what medications work as acetylcholinesterase inhibitors? Most of the Alzheimer's medications on the market, they're acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. You have linalool, which is an anxiolytic and analgesic, anti-inflammatory. And beta-caryophyllene, which acts on CD2 receptors and has pro-immune qualities, but also anti-inflammatory and very good cytoprotective properties for the gastric function. So terpene and the entourage effect of terpenes and these molecules is a sum of synergistic but also antagonistic effects. I just told you that CBD can counteract negative effects of THC. You can think it as antagonism. You can think of CBD potentially in the future as an antidote to overdose from THC. It calms down the effects of THC. If these molecules come together, cannabinoids and terpenes and other molecules, they cause these synergistic interactions. They target multiple targets throughout the body. They facilitate absorption or delivery of other active ingredients. So one ingredient in the plant can facilitate the absorption or the bioavailability of the other ingredient. It counteracts or minimizes adverse side effects. And here we have to start thinking, when we think about the entourage of the plant, we have to think about whether the whole plant phytocannabinoid extract that you're looking at, cannabis whole plant extract, or if you're studying phytocannabinoid isolates and you're using products that are phytocannabinoid isolates. Terpenes and cannabinoids that fluctuate during the growth cycle. So what this shows is, for example, acidic cannabinoids like THCA in 3 different strains. They are expressed very heavily during the beginning of the growth cycle. It's a U-shaped curve almost, where they again express heavily toward the end of the growth cycle. The same applies for the terpenes. Some of these terpenes are smaller, that are referred to as monoterpenes, smaller molecules, versus sesquiterpenes. Sesquiterpene would be a beta-caryophyllene, for example, and you have again movement of these monoterpene expression in leaves and flowers that is differential throughout the growth cycle. Terpenes in general is a protective mechanism for the plant. It's protecting the plant from UV, V-rays, from insects, from mold, from mildew, and it's a response usually to a change in the environment and in the stress. So therefore, when we talk about the strain is important, but what is really important is to standardize the chemical output of that strain. The chemical output of the strain will depend on everything that goes into the growth cycle, into the temperature, and so on. That's very important to pay attention to that, to standardize the chemical output, which we would call chemovar then, rather than a strain. And every day, on our daily entourage, we encounter facilitators and activators of the endocannabinoid system. Chocolate expresses anandamide. It expresses oleamide, which increases the production of anandamide. And nobody thinks about chocolates and all of these chocolate edibles that contain THC as if there would be no interactions with THC and anandamide that both bind CB1 receptors. Truffles. Truffles also, who likes truffles, who likes chocolate? This is our daily entourage that we like or we don't like, right? Now, when we talk about flower, the very important thing to talk about, and in general, right now in Germany, it's a flower entourage that's important, right? Because the flower use is a lot in Germany. So, we can start thinking about the smells. And let's look at this very curious drawing by Kate McLean, where she has the smell map of Edinburgh, where different colors here represent, for example, smells of the ocean, the sand, and the sea. There are dots that represent coffee shops. There's a brewery smell coming through. And so this is the map of the smell of the city, okay? Of city of Edinburgh. Now, this is the flowers that we have. This is American flowers. Which flowers do we like? Which flowers are the most medicinal? What's the difference between recreational and medicinal cannabis flower? Is there a difference, really? Is it in the composition itself? And that composition is really complex. We know it's not just THC and CBD because you can have two different flowers that have the same ratio and amount of THC and CBD, and it will cause a different biological, different physiological, and different euphoric effect on your body as well. So we have to start understanding the entourage of the strains. We have to start understanding how to explore them to the best of our knowledge. And this is when I'm going to talk about smells. When you smell things, your smells travel through the nasal cavity, and you have this really incredible olfactory bulb organ that sends its sensory nerve endings and picks up the smells, such as terpenes. Those smells then get communicated to the body centers that process emotion and memory. So smells, it's not just a smell. Smell actually has a lot of physiological activity in the brain and the body. And then, once you smell things and you process it in your olfactory, that information gets sent to the frontal cortex for perception, conscious perception, to hypothalamus and amygdala to control emotions and memory and rage, and hippocampus, again, here is for memory, for example. Memorizing or remembering what smells associated with pleasant memories and pleasant events, and what smells you should stay away from because they do not agree with you. I've been really fascinated lately by Dr. Luca Turin and the aroma industry and the perfume industry that has really perfected the understanding of smells and how these smells get converted into pleasant experiences to the wearers of the fragrances and the perfumes, as well as others that smell those, as well as how do you sell these different fragrances depending on their smell. So perfume industry is really far advanced, and I think it's time for us to learn from perfume industry about the smells and the terpenes and how to interpret these terpenes for the benefit of the individual, for the best medicinal benefit. For example, shorter molecules, esters, and some of the short chain, carbon chain terpenes, they are responsible for the top notes, and you will smell them for maybe a few seconds. So if you're smelling the flower, you should bury your nose in it for minutes, because in the first few seconds, the evaporation of these light molecules, short molecules, will happen. And then after a few seconds or minutes, you will have the heart note. You will smell some earthy smells, spiny, spicy smells. When you come to the longest carbon chains, you have the bottom note, which is responsible for piney, musky smells that can last for hours. Okay? And so if it's over 16 carbon molecules, there's usually no odor. So there's really no odor in cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are over 20 carbons long. And so the Storz and Bickel Volcano, the first bag of the Volcano, the first two bags is mostly terpenes. The third and the fourth bag, after sufficient heating of the flower matter, will now release cannabinoids, for those that are familiar with the vaporizer of Volcano. Now, we talked about the city smell maps. This is the smell maps that we have in our brains. This is the smell map for minty smell that is reflected in our brains, and this is fruity smell. And these different smells activate individual neurons in the brain and create these smell maps, where no two different molecules smell the same. And as you look inside the window of the brain, it's not just the olfactory centers that are activated by different smells, but it's activating different circuits that are communicating emotions and memories and so on throughout the brain, where no smell has the same map. Better smell usually means fresher flower. This is what I would say is a challenge and call to the industry. We have to venture into what I call aroma psychophysiology. There is aroma perception for your psychology, and there is a physiological effect. Why? Because we're not only smelling terpenes. What do we do with consumption of flower? It's the first time that we're actually inhaling all of these terpenes that sometimes can comprise up to several % of the total flower mass. We're inhaling terpenes. We've never inhaled limonene from lemon into our lungs. And so this is a very unique situation where we have to start talking about aroma psychophysiology and also neuroeconomics. You could kill your customers with one bad smell, or you could sell your customers the worst cannabis you can with one good smell, but it's only the top note, and that top note masks all the other notes in there and masks essentially the other components that are beneficial in the plant. So I'm going to skip over the slide. Very quickly I'll mention that the relationship with Girl Scout cookies is not just smelling the cannabis or the cookie itself. It's actually after you smell, and if you consume cannabis, the THC activates CB1 receptors that then reduce the glutamate, and the reduction of glutamate in this circuit actually enhances the sense of smell. So it's not only that we smell and we have the psychology of it, activation of CB1 receptors that enhance the sense of smell. This is part of the munchies because a lot of what we eat and taste is through our oronasal cavities. Finally, we come to the product entourage, where we have different products on the market. We have medicinal flowers, we have vaporizers, we have patches, we have oils, tinctures, we have vaporizing machines. And we need all of these tools because pharmaceuticals right now offer very limited availability of cannabinoid medications. As you heard the doctor say this morning, I only have Sativex and propanol, I think. Synthetic THC, or Sativex is THC, plant-derived, and CBD 1-to-1 ratio. But on the medical cannabis market, we have a whole bunch of products in different ratios. We probably have thousands of different products in different ratios. And this is really needed for the proper individualized treatment of individuals. So many ratios and many products are needed, and combinations of not just isolated cannabinoids, but full spectrum of the terpenes and cannabinoids are needed on the market. How you use the products is important. Vaporization is a healthier way of using the product. It's often preferred. Trichomes, which store the cannabinoids and the terpenes, they will melt and they will evaporate before the plant matter burns. And less carbon monoxide is released and less heat is released and smoke, so vaporization is really a more medical way of using the flower. This is Dorothy from Reefer Madness. And oils, of course, we have different oils, and we have to start paying attention now. As this market is coming into Germany, what the doctors should say, they should hold the producers responsible, ask them for all of the information they're entitled to. Is this organic product? Is this raw product? What is raw product? That means it hasn't been decarboxylated. Is it decarboxylated product? Is it decarboxylated to 50% or 70%? Is it an isolate like this? If it's an isolate like this that's now mixed in alcohol, olive oil, coconut oil, it's not CBD oil. You cannot take CBD isolate and squeeze oil out of it. You either squeeze oil from cannabis and you have cannabis flower oil, cannabis plant hemp flower oil, or you have isolated CBD in water, isolated CBD in olive oil, coconut, and what else? Now, when you look at the products, many doctors, this is how they feel. It's a wild west out there. This is one of the Cantelligence partners, Dr. Jaime Claudio Villamil from Puerto Rico. What is the dosage? What is the delivery method? What is the efficacy? What is the observational studies? How do we deal with this in 2017? What is the knowledge base and what is the belief? For example, there could be a belief that cannabis causes lung cancer. But if we look at the information and we aggregate that knowledge that is necessary for us to really understand, not going by belief, but we aggregate that knowledge, we find out it's lung irritant of smoke, there's no lung cancer, it's actually a bronchodilator. So this phase is very important, knowledge aggregation stage through observational studies and other studies. Important to know the state of the endocannabinoid system. Is the endocannabinoid system naive? Has it been overstimulated with high THC? Metabolic profile of each individual. Psychological state, proneness to being psychotic or not. Drug and drug interaction, resisting medications. With the products, the recommendation with doctors mostly in America is start low, go slow. Pay attention to dosages. Yes, you can have dosing of cannabis. Yes, you can have dosing of cannabis flower. And yes, you can tell approximately the milligrams of THC and CBD you're getting from half a gram or a quarter of a gram of flower. It is just time to learn these different aspects of using of cannabis so that there could be proper dosages, safety, and no pollutants found in any of the products that once again will lead to the best education for doctors and nurses that could then recommend these products to the patients and recommend the route of intake. This is one thing to consider, for example. If you take something orally and you ingest it, it actually travels and goes through the liver metabolism. And you get one effect, you get the metabolites. You can get secondary metabolites that are psychoactive too, like 11-OH THC acid, which is not acidic phytocannabinoid, but is psychoactive. Or if you use, for example, suppositories, you bypass liver metabolism. You have to pay attention to all of these different applications and how the body handles it. This is where Cantelligence comes in. We are really the bridge between the industry and the producers of the products. The educators, we are educators, we're information delivery method, we produce curriculum, we educate nurses and doctors. These doctors and nurses communicate to their patients. This communication has to be a two-way communication so the doctors can start gaining some answers, some observations on their own. Cantelligence comes in here and two-way direction takes the studies, and we can create observation and survey studies as well as clinical case studies. This is all bi-directional road. If we want to achieve the best medication, best individualized medication, the producers will have to talk to the healthcare practitioners to the patients, and back and forth. So finally, I'd like to acknowledge some of the partners. I would also encourage you to go to our website, cantelligence.com, which we have just launched. Has a lot of very valuable information. We write articles, we reference everything to the existing medical literature or otherwise reliable sources of information. And we'd like to thank the partners that are on here. And if you'd like to contact me, this is my email address, jz@Cantelligence, or you can just send an email to info@Cantelligence. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take some. Thank you very much.